An inimitable introduction, Carol. Thank you very much. I thought, actually, when Big Ben went silent, we'd find everybody bell ringing, you know? That this would be it. The ding-dong would be finally replicated. But actually, today was an amazing day, quite extraordinary day. Some of you may have missed it, so I'll quickly fill you in, because that's where I was. You know, I mean, after all this sort of banging about and, you know, oh, outrageous and this, that, and the other, not big enough, you know, and more army, more air force, come on. In truth, it was a very mellow affair. I was out on the streets talking to people. It was a wonderfully British event, funny, although most of the people were Brazilian. It was a wonderfully British event. People were as mad as pikestaffs. You know, I mean, there was a man looking like Father Christmas, so I simply said, you know, what's Father Christmas doing here? Oh, yes, indeed I am. And I said, God, I've been looking for years, etc., etc. But it had a very sort of dignified but carnival feel to it out there. And the interesting thing is that three groups of people were present. There were, of course, the fanatics, and they had a wonderful time, and they were either over 60 or under 23. And I talked to one bloke, two chaps actually. One said, and they were both, I'd say, under 23. And the first one said, well, you know, as far as I'm concerned, my father was born in the 60s. He made his money in the 80s, and here I am today, and I'm just jolly grateful to Margaret Thatcher. And the next one said, and I'm very, very grateful too. I'm only here thanks to Margaret Thatcher and her bringing the wall down. And I said, why? Where do you come from? I said, you have red socks. What does that imply? I come from Poland. Absolutely fantastic. The absorption of the Eastern Bloc has now reached the point at which a man can be mistaken for an Etonian. But there was also, you know, it was also spattered with sort of lovely people like the mining wife from Derbyshire, lovely freckled woman in her 60s, red sweater, and she was standing with four other women who were wearing red sweaters. This was a mark of rebellion, I might tell you, but very soft and sort of lamb's wool, I think, probably. But she was standing with three others, and I thought, gosh, they've all come together. Not a bit. One was from Brighton, one was from Liverpool, and one was somewhere else. And they merely fetched up together because they were all wearing red sweaters. And then there was another guy, the like of which I've not met recently in a long time. I said, well, who are you? What are you about? He said, I'm red and black. I said, and? I'm an anarchist. I thought, my goodness, I haven't met an anarchist in such a long time. Well, not since I was one myself at university. But it was a joyous occasion. And then the amazing shots. The BBC did an absolutely stunning job inside the cathedral. It was just fantastic. George wept. George Osborne wept. It was a really lovely shot because the tears just gently rolled down his street. You don't often see a man looking straight to camera and the tears just pouring down his cheeks. It was a sweet thing. And there was that, but there were the top shots from the dome looking down on that star that sort of is in the middle of the Wren floor. And then, of course, it widened out to reveal vast numbers of suits. I mean, amazing. Out of the 2,200 people, I would say at least 1,800 were men. And all these men had turned out for her. Very few women, not because they wouldn't want to, but because in some strange way she'd never advanced them. And that's a very strange thing. She loved men. And I was one of her lovers. I was one of her lovers because I actually made a documentary which I do urge you to see because it's jolly funny, but it was also very respectful and rather affectionate. You wouldn't expect that from a man that Dennis Thatcher bragged was that pinko. I made a documentary because, and indeed, Channel 4 said it was so irreverent it couldn't possibly go out on the night that she died. Hey presto, they put it out on the night that she died. And it was called Maggie and Me. And the reason I made it was because on day one, I was on the doorstep. In those days, you could be between the policeman and the door. There was no security whatever. And I was standing there, and I looked, there's a picture of me in the FT, very long hair. clipped accent, if they'd ever, hello. It was very much that sort of thing. And I was looking over her shoulder as she read the prayer from St. Francis of Assisi, because she didn't look as if she was reading, but actually what she had on her hand was hatred, love, despair, hope. Now imagine getting those words in the wrong order. And that must have been the nightmare. And at the bottom it said, remember A.N., Airy Neve. Very sweet. And the archivist at Churchill College, Cambridge, who have the Thatcher papers, called me up and said, look, if you are sure you saw this, it must exist. I said, not only did I see it, but there's a shot, heaven forbid me from having to admit it, but on the BBC, where you could just see the card hanging out from the bottom of the hand. And actually on the FT photo, you can see it's there. And so I said, no, I know it was there. He said, well, right, I can tell you, we shall find it. I said, what do you mean you will find it? He said, she never threw anything away. Nothing. We have everything. We have 48 handbags. We have 32 briefcases. And we have every piece of paper. And Mr. Snow, let me tell you this. If we find it, it will be the first piece of prime ministerial activity written down on paper by her in her premiership. I thought, what fun. 6 weeks later, he sent me an email. We found it. And the amazing thing was, he said she had very strange habits. One of the things was that she collected menus from every state banquet she ever attended. I said, very interesting. Is that a sense of insecurity or a sense of history? Who knows? But anyway, in a banquet from a Beijing state banquet 5 years after she became Prime Minister, it fell out, the little piece of paper. There it was. And so our documentary starts with this extraordinary development. But then I had to become more candid, and I had to explain to the viewer what it was like to interview her. I interviewed her about 20 times because I was the diplomatic correspondent for ITN. And what this meant was that every time there was a European summit, and then in those days there were European summits every bloody day of the week. Well, that's what it felt like at any rate. And the thing about Mrs. Thatcher was she never wanted to be in Europe 1 second longer than she had to be. So the poor old pilot would be on the tarmac, engines running, dry as a kite, no question of drinking, waiting for her to come out. The summit would end at 1:30 in the morning, and you would be summoned to go and do the job. And the job was to interview her. And you would enter the room, and she'd say, "Oh, John, how perfectly lovely to see you." And you would say to yourself, "My God, she knows my name." And you'd sit down and she'd say, "Will you have one?" And you say, "One what, Prime Minister?" "One of these." "Oh, Prime Minister, are you sure?" "Certainly, do have one. How are you?" She never wanted to know, of course, but she went straight on, "How are you?" So we'd have a little bit of small talk. We'd sip our whiskey, which wasn't really my tipple, but never mind. She drank plenty of it, I drank a little. And the glasses were then removed. I realised that, of course, when I'd come into the room, Bernard had whispered in her ear, "Jon Snow, Prime Minister, frightful bastard, Channel 4. But at any rate, of course, then the camera would roll, and at that moment, everything changed. Prime Minister, Jon Snow here, Channel 4 News. You know, here we are, 1 against the 12, every single time. Here we are in Madrid, once again, 1 against the 12. Is that really a way to conduct diplomacy with Europe? What a perfectly stupid question! And I sort of immediately slapped my back of my hand and said, "Stupid boy, what have you done?" I said, "Hang on a minute," I said to myself, "I ask the questions, you answer them. It's not for you to determine whether they're stupid or not. Answer it." But of course I didn't say that. I sort of said to myself, "I'm terribly sorry," and at which point, of course, I'd completely lost the thread of what I was doing, and I was being kicked around the room like so much as a mess of pottage. And of course, the trouble is that the 20 times I interviewed her, she won 20-0. You never won anything. And the amazing thing really was that there were things she said to you that no man could possibly have said to you. You couldn't say, "What a perfectly stupid question." I mean, you might, but it would say, "Well, frankly, I will ask that question, Prime Minister. If you don't want to answer it, well, the viewer can judge for themselves, can't they?" But I didn't say that because she was a woman. And more than a woman, she was Prime Minister. And more than Prime Minister, She was matron. You see, she would sit round this cabinet table, and I've been told this. I've been told this by Ken, by two Kens, by Geoffrey, by Norman, several Normans. And let me tell you, they all said the same thing. When we sat there round the table, we used to look at her, and she would be looking at us. Of course, she was usually the only woman in the room. And she would say, not in so many words, but in a look, "Kenneth, those fingernails. Geoffrey, have you washed behind your ears?" And we would feel strangely uncomfortable. Is my zipper down? And then she would, you see, when you were interviewing her, in the early days of Lycra tights, you would hear a sudden shst, shst. And this would signify that she had in fact crossed her legs, uncrossed them, and crossed them again. And this meant, in fact, that one was completely thrown. Because in that moment, matron had disappeared, the Prime Minister had disappeared, and the woman was there. And she deployed it. She deployed it. So when these strange Tory wets and dries talk about her sex, it was there, even for somebody who was described by her own husband as that pinko. But at any rate, the people who knew her best told me in this documentary that in the end, they were the people that counted in her life. Her driver, Dennis, her wonderful aide, Crawford, who lived with her for 14 years and cared for her in every need, from literally political cradle to the grave, who slept in her room 3 nights a week and tended to her. It's an amazing story, quite moving. Dennis, the driver, Crawford, and the amazing police bodyguard, who had the most amazing stories about hairdressers, which I won't go into now. I didn't come here to talk about Thatcher. I came here to bury her, not to praise her. And indeed, I never thought at any time I ever would, because the funny thing I found really was that when she died, I thought, my documentary will fly, but not today. They said it would take 2 weeks before they could, with any dignity, put it out. But as each day passed, my cellars of memory, my memory cellars, began to regurgitate dreadful things. And I began to get a little bit angry. And so I've hosed it all down. And today was a day of charm and remembrance. It was really good. I really enjoyed it. And I didn't think I'd talk to you about that. I thought I'd talk to you about the media and the golden age, which I believe we're just entering. But I won't, because what I really want to do is to ask you to ask me questions, and then we can talk about anything under the sun. Thank you. So if anybody does have a question, they can ask. If not, let's get drunk. I've stunned you. You've got no questions at all. Yeah, very good. Carol understated it. I've been there 24 years. I'm in my 25th year. I'm going to crack it. I'm going to get there. Quarter of a century. I'm going to do what even Thatcher failed to do. Stay on deck. Any questions? Yes, how sweet of you.
Story about the hairdresser.
The hairdresser, no, I mean, I don't really have particular, except that he knew more about backcombing and shampoo and treatments than I've had hot dinners. And it was extraordinary to hear this full-grown man, whose face I'd seen on so many bits of footage and the rest of it, talking with such candour about what actually happened. I mean, incredible things happened under that big shed thing that goes on the head. And she would be dictating speeches and the rest of it and saying, you know, could you get me one of those, that black briefcase in the corner and the rest of it. All this stuff was going on under the hairdryer. But hair was a massively important thing. It was the thing he was more responsible for ensuring that she got her hair done than ever protecting her body.
Wasn't it Mitterrand who said that she had the eyes of Marilyn Monroe and the smile of Caligula or something? I mean, did you talk to many of the European leaders?
You know, I deliberately ensured that there was no politician in my documentary, in that it would entirely, the only people I ever spoke to were people who knew her incredibly well, but wouldn't talk about her in life, and only would talk on condition she was dead. So I obviously did it all last year, but they all spoke on condition she was dead. And as Mitterrand was dead, I couldn't talk to him, which would have been fun. Cole's alive, but a bit...
No, but I mean at the time.
Oh, at the time. Oh, at the time, my God. I mean, it was so... they suffered from the same fingernail ear problem that the boys around the cabinet table suffered from. I mean, they just felt she was undressing them. I mean, not in a sexual sense, but just in a destructive sense, a sense in which they said, Viola, bloody hell, Viola, is that what you're wearing? Good heavens, what's wrong with good old British cotton, for goodness sake? I don't know, you know, I mean, she had such interesting views. But we could break away from her. Yes, sorry.
So who intimidates you now?
Now? That's a very leading question. I mean, to be honest, it just isn't the fun it used to be, in a sense, because of banking. Everybody's gone into banking. The cream of capacity in this country is in the banks, and everyone you talk to, with due deference, but everybody you talk to, actually, most of the people I know in banking are bored rigid, but being paid loads. Not quite the loads they were, but in a way, they're frustrated, but they're very wealthy and living very good lives. But those were the people who went into the cabinet, ran the BBC, stood on the bridge, burning deck, all that stuff. And they're all in the banks. So the banks are incredibly creamy. They've got fabulous intellects. I mean, they're really... You would speak for the truth that they are amazing intellect. I mean, I know people who are in Goldman Sachs, incredible people. I know a virtuoso violinist of 27. I mean, the finest violinist I've ever heard, who's given it up for Goldman Sachs. And he's got a brain the size of, you know, Iceland. But there it is. So I wouldn't like to say nobody intimidates me. They do. I mean, I'm worried about every interview, but it's not the fun it was. Ken Clark's still fun. Had him on tonight. He's so naughty. And I think that's why she loved him, in a funny sort of way. He was the only one that sort of stood up to her, and she loved it. Yes. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was really going for her, but you're a man. You're an alpha male. Go for it.
I get that a lot.
Good answer. Good. Yeah, that deserves a round of applause.
Thank you. Joyce Wyman from YouGov. You talked about interviewing Margaret Thatcher 20 times, interviewing all these people. Is there anyone left who you really want to interview who's still alive?
Oh, yeah.
Haven't yet managed?
Loads.
So who's the top man or woman that you really want?
Top man, Putin. We'd love to put the boot into Putin. But you wouldn't live to tell the tale. I'd really seriously love a long sit-down with Hillary Clinton. It would be great to go past the 3 minutes where, you know, it's all been prepared and you get the same answer 4 times, and then, of course, it becomes embarrassing and they have to talk. That would be wonderful. I think she would be very interesting. Not just to find out if she's going to run, but what a life. What an extraordinary, you know, dealing with him. And no, I mean, and he is formidable and yet flawed. How interesting, how fascinating. And how much did she have to mother him and all the rest of it? What's their relationship now? I think possibly quite viable in a funny sort of way. And what a grisly life to be Secretary of State. You know, probably you'd have a few women with you, but mainly you'd have men everywhere. Not have them, but I mean, be with them. I think she would be very interesting. I'd rather like to speak to Francis, our latest Pope. I think he'd be fun. Because, I mean, here's a guy who refused to live in the Cardinal's house as soon as he became Cardinal, seems to be very conservative in his views about social issues, etc., but then refuses to live in the papal apartments, and has completely forsaken all sort of, you know, bulletproof glass work and all the other crap that these guys went around in big barouches and stuff. He's got rid of the whole lot. And he was in the square the other day. I saw him, because I was there covering the sort of beginnings, and he spotted this boy who clearly was disabled. Maybe it was what is that cerebral palsy, and the boy somehow found himself on the Pope's shoulders, and the boy kissed him, and the Pope kissed him, and the boy's face just lit up, and I thought, this is a man with real humanity and touch. It would be very interesting to talk to him. No, there are loads of people. The world's full of really fascinating people. I was offered the... No, this is naughty because it's on the record. But somebody said, would you like to talk to the Dalai Lama on Friday in Brighton? And I thought, first, Brighton. But I like Brighton. And then I thought, what am I going to get out of the Dalai Lama? Something revolutionary about Tibet. Not a bad place China is. No, I don't think probably. How's my karma? I wouldn't want to have to answer the question. So Kathy's going to do the Dalai Lama. Yes. No more questions? More drunk? Oh, yes, of course, madam.
So, who will be the next female Prime Minister? Will it be Yvette Cooper, or will it be Theresa May, or another?
That is a really good question. There's a very feisty blonde from Walthamstow or somewhere. Who's the... Stella. Stella. Could be Stella. Could be Stella. Slightly bonkers, but really bright. But that's true of so many good politicians. I think you have to be slightly bonkers. I don't know. Who knows? It's going to be an accident probably when it happens. You know, after all, in a sense, she was an accident. But she didn't make it easy for anyone else, I don't think, really. I mean, she didn't advance anybody else, really. And after all, now it'll be Thatcher's grandchild, not... Actually, I gather that Amanda, I didn't actually see it, but the little Amanda Thatcher was very, very good in the service. And she is seen as the new, you know... And you see, by the time she is ready, people will have forgotten. They'll think, what fun, let's try again. So...
Over the last sort of 20 years, who would be in your, irrespective of party, which is based on strong character and authentic people, who would be in your dream team cabinet?
Gosh, that's good. Well, I'd have Neil McGregor for a start, as the director of the British Museum. And the reason I'd have him is because I'm an Iranophile. I actually love Iran, although, of course, the guys in charge are well up the Khyber. But, no, you never heard that from me. No, they're very, very nice people. I need a visa. Come on now. I'd have Neil McGregor because he is the ultimate diplomat. He was my foreign secretary. He negotiated 3 fantastic, groundbreaking exhibitions out of Iran when we were breaking diplomatic relations. Yeah. And when the old thugs were chucking rocks at the British embassy in Tehran. And more than that, they then said to him, we want our Elgin marbles, which is the Saras cylinder. The Saras cylinder is, as you all know, the first statement of human rights ever made by anybody. King Saras wrote in these hieroglyphics that only 142 people can now read that prisoners would be treated as one would treat oneself, etc., etc. There's a facsimile of it in the United Nations. We found it, we dug it up and stole it in 1897 in Babylon. We brought it here, it's been in the British Museum ever since. The Iranians have wanted it back ever since then. Foreign Office said, do not under any circumstances lend this to these vile people. And they did. And it went, and a letter came, struck 5 days before the thing was supposed to come back on its 6-month thing, saying, could we keep it for a bit longer, oh God, until Nowruz, the Persian New Year. They had no option but to say yes. 3 days after Nowruz, Neil called me up and said, bring a camera, be here at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. And in an amazing moment, we were standing in the Persian gallery, and a man with white gloves walked into the room carrying a box. He opened the box, and with his white gloves, he lifted out the Saras cylinder and put it into the glass cabinet that has contained it for the last 50 years and locked the door. And there was the completion of a complete diplomatic progress that nobody else could have achieved, and which was achieved beneath all the crap and crud and nuclear nonsense that was being preached and banged on about, above him. And so he'd be in my cabinet. Gosh, I can't talk at such length about all the others. I would take Nelson Mandela, not because he's a flawless human being, and not even because he was even a particularly good president, which he wasn't, but because he spoke of something absolutely remarkable: forgiveness. And forgiveness saved lives on an absolutely epic proportion. And nobody can ever take that away from him. I'd have him. I'd have old Gorby, because I think he was a bit sort of on the flawed side and the rest of it and fun. But, he did the right thing at the right moment. And then I'd take Amartya Sen, but I've now got 4 men and no women, and I believe in absolute equality, and I don't believe in quotas. So I'm going to take with me Mary Robinson. I think she was really good, and she's had a tremendous diplomatic afterlife. I would probably take Angelina Jolie just for a bit of fun, because she's been very effective in the Congo. And I'll leave it at 6 and leave you to fill the other 6. But, there it is. Is that it, or has the river run dry? Oh, Carol, God save us. Oh, Carol. Right, come on.
I just wanted you I will ask 2 questions. I wanted to finish on what it's like to interview Boris. Could you be Prime Minister?
Mm-hmm.
Leave that to you. And secondly, you bring up the Congo, and I was having a conversation with Stefan earlier in the week about the horrific piece on the Newsnight that a woman, had been raped in a horrendous way. What does that prove? What has that television done? Will we do anything about it? Thinking of John Sweeney, I'm not asking you to talk about the case of going off to North Korea, but what is the journalist's responsibility of actually to get the story, and how much are they going to say to people who don't know that people can see this television program in other countries to protect the person you're interviewing, even if they're giving the interview? I just brought all these things up in my mind. Just quickly, sorry.
Sorry, the first one was? Boris, yes. I hoped you wouldn't remember. Well, naturally, I have an affinity with Boris because he rides a bicycle. And for real, he really does. He's no fool, to be honest. I think he's a very interesting figure. I refuse to have Chatham House rules, so I have to say it as it is, so I can't mess around. I would say I really think it hugely unlikely he'll ever be Prime Minister, because I don't see our system working that way. The day, in fact, that Britain can pick the best to be anything will be a better day, because I think the gene pool of drawing from 300 and whatever it is, 650 elected MPs is nonsense. There must be better people to do some of the jobs. I like the American system. I like the idea of having... And they could come to the bar of the House and defend their portfolios, but I think you should take really good people right into the heart of government, not in the House of Lords, where they're immediately diminished. There's nobody who's ever been improved by having a front-loaded title on them, with due respect to anybody who has one in here. But I would believe in taking the brightest and the best, and they should be in the cabinet, and they should do things and the rest of it. And actually, of course, the aspiration of the MP should be to hold the cabinet to account. And you're not going to do that if you actually want to be Secretary of State, for development or whatever it is. It's complete nonsense. The idea that the people who are most charged with actually holding people to account actually want to be them. Well, that's going to make you either behave extremely well or not behave at all and not really ask any of the questions that should be asked. So I don't see any prospect that Boris would break through or that anybody else would break through. I think we're in a powerless position in our parliamentary situation. I genuinely don't think a majority party will take power for a long time, and I'm not sure anybody ever wants them to. The last majority government, gave us 2 wars of choice and a banking disaster. That's not a great way to go forward. And I think coalition will be with us for a long time. As a matter of fact, although this is Chatham House, I didn't vote for either of them, but I like coalition. I think it's a sublime experience. I am, for the first time in my life, living in a democratic system in which 52% of the population voted for the government we enjoy. And the great thing is that it does, in fact, knock the extremists on the head. The bonkers characters on every fringe are simply out. They're dead. They've ring-a-ling-linged, if you hadn't taken the bell away. I don't know. Maybe the next one will be Labour Plus, but I don't think it will be Labour. And I don't think it'll be Tory either, or UKIP. So I'm so envious. Jonathan Rugman is off to Bulgaria with Mr. Nigel Farage, exclusively. What a lucky boy. That will be a box of frogs. No, and I'm not talking, no. There we are. And as to the other, which is a very serious question, how you protect people, I mean, the thing that of course, used to be possible was you used to say to somebody, don't worry, it will never be seen in Genghis Khan land. Don't worry, the pictures don't reach. Everything reaches everywhere. There are no secrets from anyone any longer, and in a way, that's a great thing. You know, what an amazing thing. We were told that WikiLeaks would kill endless people, that all these leaks would destroy all sorts of agents, people would be strung up on the lampposts and the rest of it. It hasn't happened. There's not been apparently one single death as a result of a WikiLeaks leak. And that tells us a great deal, that we lived amongst secrecy, not for the benefit of us and our security, but for the benefit of the security and secrecy of the people who govern us. And that's a great thing. So all that's a lot of nonsense. So as to guarding that we have to be far, far more careful than we've ever been, because somebody seen in Southend on a local TV station will be seen in North Korea, will be seen in the Congo, will be seen anywhere on earth. So we have a far greater duty than we've ever had, but we also have a far greater capacity to reach the parts we never reached before. We've allowed 45,000 people to be murdered every month in the Congo over a period of time. It's slightly down now, thank God, but the rape is still very strong. And we do nothing about it, nothing. You know, we've still got our priorities wrong. We report every murder in Britain, and yet we have a lower murder rate than practically any other country on earth. And the murders we should be reporting are the ones in the Congo and the rest of it, because they're still on such a horrible scale. Having ended on such a down note, I can't think of any joke to end with, but I think I should shut up and sit down.